me about it. Come on, let's talk about it. Change up the things you see. Open your mind to possibilities. Find your power, passion, and your purpose. You know it's time for you to walk in greatness. Let's murder mediocrity. Slay your goals, live out your dream. Right now. Inspirational perspective.
But as you guys know, whenever we go to Ghana, I'm always very, very much curious about what the travelers took away, what their experience is, but more importantly, to also share that with you all. We'll be headed back sooner than later, and there's still time for some of you all to sign up for that opportunity and trip in September. And so I just want to go around, I guess, in a circle and allow these sisters to introduce themselves, and then the brother on the line to introduce themselves before we get started. And so I'll start with you, Yvonne, if you don't mind sharing, the rest of your name, and also, why Ghana? What inspired you to make this pilgrimage to Ghana?
Well, I'm Yvonne Womack Sweeney, and I've always been excited about the thought of returning to Africa, and particularly a trip to Ghana on the West Coast, where a high percentage of my ancestors came from.
Yeah.
I mean, what could be better than that? So that's always been a point of excitement for me to even think about.
Mm-hmm.
So when the opportunity came, and really our family kind of planned to go somewhere together.
Mm-hmm.
And there were different countries we thought about in Africa, because Africa was going to be the destination. And we did vote.
Okay.
And Ghana was one of the choices that we were choosing from, and it won the day.
Got you.
So then we made that connection, of course, with you, which was really, really marvelous. Everything happened at the right time. My son said, Ma, there's someone that's taking. I said, well, hey, this works. So things don't just happen. They happen
I believe that.
So, yes, that's the reason that I was so excited to go. And it all turned out and worked. Things were in divine order, as we say. Perfect.
Excellent. So we'll come back and we'll talk a lot. I mean, this is all about the experience in Ghana, but I just wanted the audience to to get to know who you are and what took you to Ghana. And so next we'll go to Tasha.
Thank you. Yes, hello there. Great seeing you. My name is Yatasha Womack. A lot of people know me because I wrote the book Afrofuturism, the world of black sci-fi and fantasy culture. And I have an upcoming book on the Black Panther comic called Black Panther Cultural Exploration. Comes out in October. So for me, when I talk about Afrofuturism, one of the creative dynamics that we discuss as a center point is the principle of Sankofa. And Sankofa, one of the symbols it's an Adinkra symbol. It has two variations of that symbol. One is a bird kind of looking at an egg on its tail, and one way to think about it is it says you can always go back. And in the Afrofuturist context, we talk about it in terms of bringing the best of the past into the future. So this symbol is an Akan symbol. The Akan are one of the larger ethnic groups in Ghana, certainly very prevalent in Accra. And so it was exciting for me to, of course, go to Africa on a family trip. And then going to Ghana presented itself as a way to think about the return, but also to think a bit about some of these Adinkra symbols. There's 100 of them. And to think about, for me, how they intersect with the culture of Ghana, how it intersects with the concept of the return. The nation is Pan-African. They really want people of the diaspora to come back and connect. But then it was, fascinating to see just how meaningful this return is for the people there. It's not just a marketing ploy, but it's a part of the culture. And some of that, ironically, or maybe not ironically, is tied to this principle of Sankofa, which we see all over the Americas. But certainly when you're in Ghana itself, you see the symbol everywhere. I mean, it's as prominent as the symbol for God. So it's, I think that says a lot. Just about this more ancient wisdom and what the role it plays as a contemporary lens.
Got you. Well, thank you. Looking forward to hearing more from you as well. And then we have Deborah. And Deborah, this is your second time.
This is my second time. Good morning. And it won't be my last time either. I'm Deborah Birmingham, and I became interested in Ghana because, as I shared last year, I had my younger daughter did a university internship in public health in Ghana. When she returned, she sent us a message saying that she was sad. We were like, what's going on? Why are you so sad? She said she missed the children of Ghana. And I thought that was really interesting for her to say she missed the children of Ghana. So I was looking forward to going back to see what really interests her so much in Ghana. And I got to tell you, it was a wonderful, life-changing experience. I went without her last year, but this year I got an opportunity to go with her. And I found this trip very meaningful in many ways. As I shared some time ago, I was hoping to go in September, but when we were on the Zoom call and I saw all the family members going, different family members, the young people, the older people, the cousin names, the auntie names, the church folks names, I was like, hey, I think I want to go on the June trip. And I'm glad I did. And this opportunity gave me a chance to be with my daughter on this particular trip. Mm-hmm. So it was a wonderful journey together with my present family and meeting new friends and adopted family.
Absolutely. And that's really what it becomes. I mean, a whole family. We start off as, strangers in some ways in our own groups, and then it always ends as family, which is one of the beautiful things about this trip. So, Deborah, this is your second time. How was it for you, having had the initial experience in Ghana, which you had last year in October, September, October, and October, November last year. And so, I mean, really, about 6 months later, finding yourself back in Ghana, what was it like the second time around for you? Like just landing, kind of being back with the people, having some familiarity. I'm very curious about that for you.
For me to return, it was another notch on my healing journey. It allowed me to return. And Yatasha just used the term that I'll go back to later. It's okay to look back as you're moving forward. Yeah. So this trip, for me, helped me to know that it's okay to look back as I continue to move forward. So this trip, the second time was, hey, Deb, you're making progress. You're really growing in what you want to do. And I'm so grateful for it.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. And then we have Brother Marcellus on the live line. Marcellus, you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Awesome. And, wish you could be in the studio. Know you're down there in Florida. And so, that would have been a tough grab for you coming back from Ghana. But, man, would love to hear your thoughts. First time in Ghana, first, what got you excited about going in the first place? And then what was that experience like for you when you finally hit the ground?
Yeah, and I want to make sure, is the connection clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, awesome. Well, yeah, let me make sure I have, okay, there was some feedback I was hearing, so.
Yeah, we hear you loud and clear.
But yeah, okay, cool. Well, I think there's a great quote. It states that blessed is the person who plants trees under whose shade they will never sit. So, my mom is in the studio with you, my sister as well. And so between my parents and family, they were really able to create this environment of really planting these seeds of Black empowerment, seeds of connecting to our African roots. And so I grew up in a house where I saw all of the promotional materials and buttons for Harold Washington when he became the first mayor of Chicago, Jesse Jackson when he ran for president, all of the civil rights journey from Martin to Malcolm, and before them with Harriet Tubman and our story and understanding of slavery. And so that wasn't something that was different. That wasn't something that I had to rely on school. It was something I saw around me. And if anyone ever came in our house, they saw African artwork and sculptures. So those are things I grew up with. So not that I always understood it, but there were seeds planted. So when I got to a certain age and began to understand, and even through culture, you probably remember, Linnell, we grew up during a time in the 90s where it was cool to wear African medallion.
Yeah.
It was cool to rock, red, black, and green. There was a spirit probably championed by your public enemies and many others in culture where it was the cool thing to really double down on Black empowerment and our connection to African culture. So when I got to a certain age as an adult and began to travel, and even though I had went to, a couple of countries within this continent, or even islands right around it, I told myself that there's no other country that I want to travel to before I get to Africa. And so this experience and the way that it unfolded, with my mom kind of sharing it, but our family kind of connected during the pandemic where we were all spread out throughout the nation. But there were a lot of things going on where we began to come together as a family through Zoom virtually. And when those conversations became what could be one of the greatest events for our family. And Africa was chosen to be just a dream trip. And for all of the reasons that I've mentioned and so many more. So, to fulfill that, and, Linnell, you have a platform where you champion dreams and people accomplishing the grandest version of their greatest visions. So, lastly, when you ask, what did it feel like to touch down? All of these seeds that have been planted, and to be able to experience that and touch down on this place, this very powerful place, something that reflects, as Tasha mentioned, past, present, future, alpha, omega, I'm sure, in so many ways. And to do that, and not only do that, with the quote that I mentioned where, someone can plant a seed, for trees for which their shade they will never sit in, but to be able to go there, with family and my mom, someone who would plant the seed, within me, and to be able to experience that, in this lifetime, incredibly special.
Wow.
So everyone that I met became a brother, a sister, family in that, and that's kind of the experience that you champion. So salute.
I'm curious, either Yvonne or Tasha, like, what were your thoughts when you hit the ground, you walk outside the airport, you're in the bus, kind of moving towards the hotel, and it's like, I'm here. Like, what was going on for you all?
Well, I just felt at home. I did. I felt at home. I felt, wow, I made it. And, it's happening. This is real. I am in Africa. I'm in Ghana.
Yes.
I wanted to kiss the ground, I tell you.
But I've had travelers do that. I don't think we would have looked at you any different.
Yeah. Well, it was just that kind of experience. Yeah. And when I went through customs, the gentleman said, "Welcome home."
Yeah.
And I said, "Wow, thank you. I'm back."
Yeah.
So that was just special, and I kept that feeling really through the whole trip. seeing my brothers and sisters and knowing the connection was there.
Yeah.
And they welcomed me back home.
Very nice. Very nice. Tasha, what about you?
Well, it was funny. In preparing to go for the trip, I had a girlfriend who went the week before. And then I had another girlfriend who went a few months prior to that. So I had their notes in mind when I was landing. I'd been to Africa before. I'd been to Senegal.
Mm-hmm.
So a part of me was just curious to know how they were similar or how they were different. And, you know, much like my mom, there are a lot of people saying, welcome home.
Mm-hmm.
A girlfriend of mine joked, she said that going to Accra or going to Ghana is like going to Atlanta. And I thought that was pretty funny. But I think essentially what she's saying is it feels familiar.
Yeah.
It feels welcoming. And I think part of that is because so much African American culture is informed by some Ghanaian perspectives.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, a lot of the symbol Sankofa, you know,
Right.
It's not just a word we have all over the place, but it is something that plays a big role in a lot of our thought processes here. And when we talk about Pan-Africanism or unity, et cetera. So my first thought, I don't want to say the word surprising. It was really fascinating to see how inviting and welcoming it was. And Dakar is similar in that sense. Dakar is a big city in Senegal. It's a similarity. Difference being in Ghana they speak English,
Right.
in addition to Twi and other languages, but English is one. So there is a familiarity, almost like you've been there before, or you're coming back. So when they're saying welcome home, in one sense you're like, wow, this is great. They really do feel like I'm home. But then you feel like, it's like you're going to your aunt's house. I mean, it does have that vibe to it. Just in landing, and the people are very inviting and very kind. And I have to say, to other travelers in the diaspora and African Americans, that whole mission of Ghana wanting people to come back is a part of the culture.
Yes.
So, and you feel that, I think, which is a unique experience for a lot of African Americans.
Yeah. And I know often African Americans hear something that's, counter to that experience. And I think that's one of the reasons you all sharing your experiences is so important. The other thing I would say is one of the questions I often get is, Linnell, what about the food? Like, am I going to be okay? And I always tell them, I'm like, well, how you feel when you go to your auntie house and you eat? How you feel when you go to grandma's house when you eat? They like, well, I mean, that's love. I mean, I'm cool with that. I'm like, that's how it's going to be in Ghana when you eat. And I'm curious, did you all have that experience just like in terms of the cuisines and even the clothing, et cetera? Like, how did that feel as well for you?
It was super for me. The food was great. I sampled a little this and a little that. They do not cook with much salt at all. I'm not one to eat salt, but they mainly have their own seasonings that give the food a great taste without drenching it so much in the salt and pepper that we use here. The food was good. The culture and the warm invite to take part was very heartfelt. I enjoyed it.
Got it. Tasha, Yvonne, like how did you feel? Is that a truthful statement about the food and going? Because I mean, one of the major concerns most people have about Ghana is like, all right, how am I going to eat? Am I going to be okay? Am I going to get sick, etc.?
The food was delicious. It was just good. That's all I can say. I was blessed to be there with my husband, and he was like, oh, wow, what did they put in this? Tastes like a little basil, tastes like a little, oregano. And I'm like, I don't know. Whatever it is. It's just some good food. And we went to a lot of restaurants. I mean, at least 2 a day.
Yeah.
And it was just always amazing. We had a variety of foods to choose from, and I certainly did that. Tasted the variety, but that's my bottom line was I didn't taste anything that I did not like.
Love it. And Tasha, for you, I mean, you've been to Senegal. Senegalese food is amazing as well.
Yes.
I mean, it has a very, to me, like Senegal, Ghana, Dakar, Accra.
Yeah, it's like New York, Chicago. In some way, right? Yeah, but the food was fantastic. It's now I have to tell people it is spicy. I
Okay.
love spice.
Okay.
So there's a heavy spice component. I don't know how many peppers, you can find, but you can find something that you think is a green pepper, and boy, is it not a green pepper. Right? So I think that's something just to give people a heads up about, like, hey, the food is spicy. So there's a lot of like fish and rice, the rice, a lot of jollof rice, but then not just jollof rice.
Yeah.
You had something that was called red, which is almost like a red beans and rice, or it had the feel of black beans and rice, red beans and rice, but spicier, different texture. And so, there's a show. I think it's called High on the Hog, where they talk about the relationship between, African American foods. And you see that, and the spice. And then I think another thing, there are a lot of African Americans who have moved back. So we went to a few restaurants
We
that
did.
were African American owned. They have Ghanaian food, and they also have soul food. So, you can get your catfish, and then you also get your tilapia with your jollof rice. So I thought that was super cool. And juice, the mango juice is popular. It's everywhere.
My favorite is the watermelon juice. Like this, you can't go wrong with that. Yeah.
Right. So I think, so the food's not an issue in that sense.
Got it. Marcellus, what about you, brother? That experience, touching the ground, the food, the people. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, one, just to piggyback on the food, what I felt was the food was a lot lighter. So even though, we had buffets and we had, incredible places to eat, and the chicken or, the fish or the jollof rice, which is one of the specialties there, we could eat a late lunch and a early dinner and it not sit heavy. I felt like I needed a nap in between. And I know you work out a lot, Linnell. I try to keep up with some schedule. I can only imagine like what that looks like to be on that diet for a long period of time and the type of effect it have on your body, and to transform in that way as well. So, and I felt the difference when I came back to America in terms of the food that I probably eat here that's a little more processed. I think they think of sometimes, we think of fast food in the opposite ways. So we'll run out here in America to get something really quick from somewhere. And for some of us, that's a little more of our diet than we probably should incorporate. But I didn't really see people running to get fast food. It wasn't really brought up to go to any of the places they had, and they really weren't as prevalent there. So I think there's a stronger diet, and that, what you put inside you, impacts you mind, spirit-wise as well. So,
absolutely.
and I would just say on the other end with the people, what was very noticeable was black is black. So sometimes there's this fear that we could have, we're going to Africa, and I've heard other people speak of it or even ask me about my trip, like, oh, did you get sick, or oh, did something happen, or and they're speaking like this is a foreign, planet. And it's the best feeling is to be there. And from my experience, from my family, even all of those who were there, like Deborah, some of the people shared that in some ways I don't feel more comfortable than here. I'm around, it's almost foreign to see somebody that's not black there. And we don't really know that experience a lot of times in this nation. And to feel a level of comfort, to be around your people and to feel a certain culture and immerse in it that really builds towards a connection that may have never, ever been felt. It's a magical experience. And those are your people. Those are our people. The people selling at the marketplace, just like the people selling off the Dan Ryan.
Yes.
Moving, if you bought a T-shirt that way, buying a T-shirt is something very similar. And you go to the club, like we went to it last night. Same rhythm. If you can dance, if you like hip-hop, reggae, Afro beats and everything that they play is something very similar. You'll actually hear some of the same songs. And Afro beats has become so popular that you hear a lot of that music here. So there's a oneness. It's nothing to be afraid of. It's our people. And one may argue there's very few magical experiences that compare.
Man, I love that. I love that. And what it brought to mind for me is when you look at the national rate for diabetes among African Americans in the United States of America, it is at a startling high. And it's because we're in a foreign land. We're in a foreign land. We can call this home as much as we want to, but our bodies, they aren't reacting to this foreign land the way that it reacts in Ghana. I love what you called out there, Marcellus, in terms of the food being light, the feeling that you had with the food, and just the curiosity around, what would your experience be if that were your, everyday diet in Ghana? What would your experience of health be? And what I can say is that the brothers and sisters in Ghana, the brothers and sisters throughout the, African continent don't battle the diseases that we battle here in the United States, because we are eating a foreign diet and we are eating a processed diet. And then it's well known that the United States of America, in terms of its health regulations and food regulations, is last place in the world when it comes to what they allow in the ingredients or processes of our foods. And so just another reason to go. Very curious about you all in terms of your experience at the dungeons. And Deborah, this is your second time. Like, what was it like for you this time around? Second time, and then also being there with your daughter. Like, what was that experience like for you?
Thanks. The first year I went, I pictured my ancestors being there, and I was angry, I was hurt, I was sad. Just so many things went through my mind. What were their thoughts? What were they going through? Were they afraid that they'll never see their children, their loved ones again? This year, having my daughter there, it was a lot deeper, because here's my daughter, there's my daughter, someone I love, she's with me. Okay, but to just the thought of not being able to see my child again, that was just heart-wrenching. Just the thoughts that went through their minds as they were entering the dungeon, going through that door of no return. To go through a door and know that I couldn't see my child, that was just heartbreaking, just the whole thought. So I see why we suffer from depression, anger. People say, get over it. That's not something you get over. No, by no means. It's still there. So even though it was my second time going, the thoughts and the feelings are still there, and they're strong.
Got you. Got you. Yvonne, what about for you? What was that experience like? And being there with two of your children, your husband, what was that experience like for you in those dungeons?
I guess, well, first of all, I was so fortunate to be there with family. I mean, that was just an extra blessing, because I was going to Africa, but to be there and have their support, and to know that we were bonded with our ancestors through the trip was just exceptional. Everyone doesn't get that experience.
Right.
And I understood that I was very fortunate. When you said the word dungeon again, that feeling just came back.
Yeah.
I said, well, I hope I don't cry here.
And it's okay if you do, because believe me, we all get it. Any of us who have experienced it, we understand. Yeah.
And it was just the sorrow. It was so much sorrow to me.
Yeah.
The anger, I think, was underneath there, but the sorrow of not knowing anything and no one feeling that you're a person.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, you've gone from a life you've lived, you've done your everyday thing, whatever it is, as a African living and breathing and enjoying your family and your friends and you're working. Then all of a sudden, you're not.
Yeah.
And you're in devastating conditions.
Yes.
Darkness. Standing, smacked up against others. In a dungeon for real.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Standing in your own waste. Your food comes in, sits in the waste. You're supposed to, what's happened? What am I? Who's doing this? Why would you do this? What have I done to you?
Yeah.
I don't know you.
Yeah.
That's right.
So that feeling I felt I was my ancestor. And it just was overwhelming to me, every step that we took. Because every step you took was by force of threats.
Yeah.
That if you don't do this or that or whatever, move with the group, you won't be alive. So I was completely overwhelmed with the feeling of, I'm so sorry that you went through this. Wow, I'm standing where you stood. It was a lot.
Yeah.
But it was necessary. And that's why I was there.
Having experienced it, necessary in what way?
So that I could pass it on. So that I could understand the strength, the courage it took to withstand. So that I would know that's me too.
Yeah.
Because I come from you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my progeny come from you.
Yes.
So that was why it was necessary, so we could tell. As an educator, I knew my mission was to make sure that everyone I touched felt those ancestors through me.
Yes.
Got it. Wow. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing so authentically. Tasha, you had a form of this experience in Senegal. Going through, I'm curious about, one, the difference in the experience, if there's a difference, and what this experience was like for you.
Sure. Well, in Senegal, I went with the Black Rock residency. So I was there with artists. Dakar is very much an artist city, among other places. And it was also my first time going to the continent.
Okay.
So
Dakar, by the way, was my first experience on the continent as well.
okay, I think it has that welcoming space, like Accra, but different.
Yep.
So off the coast of Senegal, the city of Dakar is on the coast.
Right.
There's an island called Gorée Island. It's maybe a mile or so off the coast. You can see it, much like, if you're in San Francisco, you can see Alcatraz, right? So what was interesting to me the time I went to Senegal was the ocean whistle striking. The ocean didn't look like the ocean from the American side. I've been in the Caribbean, you look at the ocean didn't seem scary to me. But when I saw the ocean from the first time from Senegal, it looked like an entirely different universe. Like, it looked full, it looked crowded, it looked mystical, and it looked it looked unsettling. So I'm a person who loves to swim and be in the water. I was in Senegal for maybe almost 2 months, but it took me a couple weeks to get into the water. It's like, I don't know. This isn't,
That Pacific looks, it looks intimidating.
Yeah,
on the West African coast.
Yeah, that whole, looking at the Atlantic, it was intimidating, initially. And part of that is DNA memory, right?
Mm-hmm. Epigenetics.
Part of that is DNA memory.
Absolutely.
And then, in African societies, they're on the coast and near the rivers, there's always a river spirit or a spirit in the ocean, right? So there's that dynamic, too. Mm-hmm. And you can see where that would come from when you're looking at it.
Absolutely.
So when you have Gorée Island's a very small island, right? Mm-hmm. You take a boat there, and you start to feel like you're going through the process of your ancestors. I'm on a boat. It's mostly black and African people. And I'm like, really? You get
Did I just do this?
Like, am I just going
Right.
through the path?
Right.
And so the experience, at least of going to Gorée Island, I think, used to have close to 20 what they called slave houses, meaning they were smaller scale spaces that had maybe 2 or 3 dungeons, but the spaces were smaller, and smaller is relative.
Yeah.
Most of those they eliminated, and one remains. Mm-hmm. And in your collective imagination, when you go to you think about going to these places, to the extent you think about going to them, it doesn't hit you that people live on this island.
Yeah.
Much like in Cape Coast or Elmina, people live.
People live
right
in that fort.
And
yeah.
it was sort
above
of
the dungeons.
It was a holiday. So when we're going there, I'm seeing kids on the beach and people running around, and there's a kind of festiveness just because people are living there and it's a holiday. But simultaneously, everything about the island looks like 1795 because all the architecture and the structures are the same. And so, you're passing baobab trees, you're passing all the things you read about. And then when you get to what they call the slave house in Gorée Island, in their case, as soon as they open what would be the gate, you see the door no return. Mm-hmm. And you're like, really? Really? This is the first thing I'm going to see. So in that moment, I was numb. But I was also, you have a moment when you cry, but I was numb because there's something about that architecture looking the same where you start thinking you're seeing things, right? Like, you can almost see the people moving in chains. It feels like if you look too hard, you'll start to see,
you can see it,
the past, right?
I've had that experience.
You stick your hand out and, somebody will shake it from the other side.
Yeah.
Like that was the feeling when I was in Senegal, right? Mm-hmm. And I got to kind of stand on this ledge at the door no return for a very, very long time, which I feel appreciative for. So when you go to, in Ghana, you go to Cape Coast and you go to Elmina. These are large-scale castles. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You can see them as you're driving up. Mm-hmm. It looks like the castle fort on the hill that you would see in a fairy tale almost,
which
right?
it is in many ways. Yeah,
right.
Well-defended position.
Right. Mm-hmm. So you see the high walls. It's, it's white, which is also kind of interesting. And then when you get in, you walk in, it's these very high walls. You can't see in from the outside. And when you go inside, there's this big courtyard. And immediately you can hear the ocean crashing up against the wall. And it's like, really? Mm-hmm. Really? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's that water thing that hits in a particular way. You can see the cannons, at least in Cape Coast, immediately you see these cannons. You get the tour of the upper decks, and you see where they were entertaining guests and where the generals lived, and you see this courtyard. So there's an aspect of it from the top that can have a little level of beauty. If it wasn't what it was, you could look at it a little differently. And I think one thing I learned that was a little helpful for people who are still trying to figure out how did I get here, one of the guides did say that there was one general who had an African girlfriend, and she lived there for several weeks, and she didn't even know people were in the dungeons.
Yeah, didn't even know.
So there were people who were free living outside of it They didn't know what was going on. So there is, now clearly that couldn't have lasted forever.
Right.
But the point
Right.
is, the way it was set up, there was an invisibility to it. And, you know, so the Cape Coast.
You know, to that point, keep your thought. But that invisibility, because often I know we think about, you know, these individuals who were perpetrators of the slave trade, and we ask, like, what level of consciousness did they have, right? You know, did their conscience speak to them? And you saying that, I think is very clear that they knew what they were doing.
Oh, no,
wrong.
you
It was
completely know what you're doing.
Yeah,
I
they
mean,
knew what they, to the point where they hid it.
Right, and it
Yeah.
was very strategic. You know, you see the cannons aimed out at the ocean for other European powers who want to take over, and you see the cannons aimed at the roads where Africans could come and attack.
Yep.
Because they're protecting goods and property at this point, right?
Yeah, assets, yeah.
That's right. And so, you know, so you have this courtyard, what could be, if you didn't know what you're looking at, something that's a little intriguing. But then, you know, the dungeon piece, again, you're walking on, you're not even walking on the cobblestone. You're walking on excrement and menstrual blood and all the tears and the sorrow. And you see these dungeons, they're not comfortable for 20 people. Better yet, 200.
Right.
And, you know, they'll have 2 windows that are as wide as your wrist, you know, and as tall as your, you know, going from your fist to your elbow. And that was where the food was dropped. You know, you're just like, this is awful. And so my experience there was anger.
Yeah.
You know, the church in Cape Coast Castle is built on top of the male dungeon. You know, Elmina, which is 500 years old, I think founded by the Portuguese, is there's a giant church in the middle of the courtyard. And your thought is, this is sick. This is sick. You know, you hear about the sexual assault of the women, the psychological way they would parade the women who acquiesce by letting them take a bath and wear a dress. If you don't acquiesce, you have to carry a cannonball, like, you know, and this is, you know, this sort of psychological thing. But, if there's a but, all right, I think what was interesting was that the way the tour is handled, the guides talk about there are a lot of people who died.
Yes.
But those ancestors helped those who lived to move forward. And what strikes you, because on your tour you have people go from, we went to something called the Last Bath.
That's right.
Right?
Manso.
Right. So you're raided from this village. You know, a person's marched several, you know, dozens of miles to this river where they're held. They take a bath. Then they're marched another several dozen miles, if not over 100, to these castles where they're then held for 3 months. Where, you know, if you survive that, which is hard to imagine.
There was about a 20% to 30% mortality rate.
Right.
So just think about that.
And
right?
then you think, okay, then that one person then went on to the ship, and they're on the ship for several weeks. Then they're sold at the plantation. And what you realize, one person went through that process.
Yeah.
You know, so in a lot of our ancestries, it's at least, well, it's more than one, but there's one single individual who went through all of that.
All of it.
And not, you know, and then sometimes when we're thinking about these things, we kind of group the trajectory of the Jim Crow and the slavery all in one. But there was one person who went through this whole arc of a thing. And so when you're there and they're telling you that these are some of our best and our brightest, and these were, you're like, they speak of these people who survived like they were these super ancestors, you know, on some next level.
Well, and in some ways they had to be.
Well, all of us were sitting there. I don't think any of us have a full grasp of how you could survive any of it. You know.
Well, so think of it this way, right? We spent maybe about 20 minutes in the male dungeon, 15 to 20 minutes in the male dungeon. And many of us were perspiring, right? We had towels, because it was hot. Some of us couldn't stay because it just, it's like I need to go up and get air. I saw a few, like, is there a mosquito in here? So like kind of rubbing an arm. And we were only there for a very short period of time to endure that discomfort so that we could learn about our ancestor and whatever it is that they went through for maximum 3 months in that space. 3 months in that space. And by the way, that was only a portion of their journey, as you were talking about. I mean, they had to get to Anson Manso, so they were captive well before that, months before that, and only to be taken to this as a holding place. And so to that point, I mean, I just want to point, like, when you say, like, it's one person went through that. When I think about our ancestors, and in particular, when I think about the dungeons in Cape Coast or Elmina, I think about my paternal ancestor, who was Burkina Faso. And Burkina Faso, the border of Burkina Faso, is 900 miles away from Anson Manso. So, like, just kind of wrap your mind around that. In order for him to become a captive and leave the shores of West Africa, he had to take a trek, a walking trek, where he was likely barefoot, probably naked, if not almost naked, steel chains around his wrists and feet, and a steel chain collar around his neck. 900-mile walk, barefoot, through only God knows what type of conditions, only to be dragged into that river that we spend time at in Anson Manso to be washed. And one of the things we talked about at the river, if you guys recall, was, like, I can only imagine the emotional state of our ancestors to be pulled into water that is shocking and inviting, right? To be walking barefoot on rocks that are cutting your feet while there's a part of you that's like, and this feels good, because I mean, who knows, like the mosquitoes and things that have been on the body, the whelps, the chains, and so the sting of the water, like this, like it had to be so conflicting for them to be pushed into that circumstance of being bathed and then covered with palm oil, only to be taken to a block where they're auctioned off. And then here's the piece that's interesting to me. I imagine there was some level of hope when they were on that block, that this next person, whoever this is going to place me in a better condition. Or there might be some hope that my people catch us, or they trailed us and we stopped, and so they'll find me. Only to be taken to that dungeon that you spoke so clearly about.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot,
yeah.
But, as my mom mentioned, essential, and, as Deborah was saying, it's I think as an individual, there's a kind of, someone asked me, was it cathartic? And I don't know if cathartic is exactly the word. But it does answer some questions and heal some things. And I think, it was interesting to hear kind of the Ghanaian perspective of thinking about the sense of loss of people and loved ones and, those and not knowing what happened to them. And then, multiply that times several centuries. Yeah. So the return is a healing for a lot of people for a lot of reasons, some of which can get a little complicated. Yeah. And so that I think is what's special. And, once you get, these are emotions you process for a long time. But I think the commitment to the moving forward, going back to Sankofa and what we were saying, you look back so that you're able to move forward.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's wow. Marcellus, what were your thoughts in terms of those dungeons and the experience in those dungeons and whatever it is that you'd like to add to what was said?
Yeah, I think something for me, that set the tone. And because I came from a different destination, most of everybody on the trip came from Chicago. I came from Florida. And during that time, there was an airline that had a whole bunch of flight cancellations. So mine was one of them. So I caught up a little later on the third day. And so I met up with you all to go to the river. So that was my first experience. And then you was able to take me and my fam to the slave dungeons.
Right.
So something that happened at the river where they had the last bath, and then we were walking out of that leaving, and one of the kids from like a nearby village snuck into the area, and I heard this. I saw him, and then I heard this most angelic voice say Aquaba. He said Aquaba, and it was this angelic. And I looked at him. He looked at me for a minute. Then he walked up to me. He had the most incredible English and spoke about how he was 9 years old and he was, doing this. He was on the soccer team, and he was kind of speaking in a way where they wanted to connect it. But he grabbed my hand, held it, walked on my arm, and it was something a little more special. And so I gave him some Ghanaian CDs, and that was that. But it felt different. It felt like he was somebody that he knew who I was on a certain level. And he almost felt, and I have a son, and anyone who has a child knows that there's an incredible connection. It almost feels beyond life, that there's a connection that you all have had, and it's even beyond destiny. So he had me only, seeing him for that 2-minute period. There was some feeling just like that. So to go to those slave dungeons, for me, for whatever reason, and I, all the different experiences people can have of anger and, seeing these different things, to me, it went straight to a place of when you see the circumstances and the small ventilation and, the ground and the color that you've never seen before and lumped up and all the different things that my mom and Tasha, has shared. I got to a place of, we've been there before. There's and we can fast forward through the epigenetics of it and the DNA of being, descendants of those that were there. I felt like, no. And the reason why we can connect to a story, whenever you connect to a story, like, wow, that really felt a certain way, there's a part of you that experienced it. And I'll fast forward it to say that you did experience it.
Yeah.
So I think on some level, I can't break it down. I don't know, all of the philosophical, multi-universe components to it. But we were there. We have been there before because there were only two extremes. And it really hit me when we went into the female dungeons. And as a man, in worst case scenarios, and Linnell, as a family man, you're willing to take the sacrifice, and you would prefer if worst case scenarios happen that they happen to you versus your family.
Yeah.
And so to see that women and kids and female kids went through that, it is the worst thing ever. For a man that's been raised like us and me, being raised with a mom and sisters, and having a lady and just, caring for women. And to this day, there was a lady that was found who could have been a victim of sex trafficking. Luckily, but that's a very parallel situation. So a lot of times we may look at slavery and say, wow, these things happen. How could somebody have sold them? How could there have not been anything to have helped them? And I would hate to think that in 150 years from now, they could look at something happening now and be like, how could it have been those black men and all this black excellence going on with things that have happened that will have an impact later on where people will look back and say, wow, that was so oppressive, but there was an invisibility to it.
Yeah.
So the extreme for me would have been one, okay, stop. God, hey, stop the storytelling. This has been so horrible, and it happened at a level that probably continues, that every black man on this continent and across the world needs to find a way to get to these dungeons and sit up in there and not come out until we have like a real answer. Like, and cut all of that off to redeem what happened in the past to those ancestors and what may even be happening in some way in the present, because we're not being that intentional. And it was that type of, not even anger. It's like, this is, because I don't even know if those oppressors were operating out of the anger as much of, oh, they got an agenda and they're not deviating for nothing and sacrificing humanity in the process and our people. So it was that extreme. But if it's not that, then on the far other side is what you all shared in some way, oh, they weren't there. Because I think the average age of a slave was 17, and it's very obvious when you see these conditions that those that could have been preyed upon were preyed upon, which would have been a lot more women and kids.
Yep.
And, yeah, they weren't. You have to tap into a whole different spiritual place. When our family did some ancestry research, they found that there was a 12 and 13-year-old brother and sister that were brought through that transatlantic slave trade to hit the shores of America. So for that to happen, there was such a great spiritual place. And I would even say on some level, we were that 12 and 13-year-old kid at some point.
Yep.
At some point, I could see, wow, this was our moms and daughters and wives, and they were here. And as a man, to not have been able to do something about that is heartbreaking. But I think there's the transformation. When you call it a transformational tour, for me, it was, oh, not only have we been there, and not only have we proved, because every superhero story starts in a real tragedy. You know, Superman, his planet blew up and he had to leave with all, a lot of his family. Batman, the parents got murdered. Spider-Man, parents got lost in a, killed in an airplane, and even for those believers, in Christ, like, that is a horrible way to end somebody's life. And so, but there was a reason for that. And if people believe in Christ and believe that that was necessary so that our lives could be saved, and there was a sacrifice for that. Something that one of the guides said at the last river was, we pray to Jesus and thank him for his sacrifice, but do we do the same for our ancestors crucified in the slave trade? Because they too are messiahs that did the same. And so to connect on that level, and then to connect a little more with those feelings of like, maybe you were there in some capacity. Maybe, Linnell, you were the one who walked those 900 miles. That's why that story relates to you. And you survived it. And my mom and sister and everybody part of this trip, Deborah, and, my lady Tania, and, even my son, the guy who said Aquaba, the young kid. All of us have survived that, and maybe survived even more from the actual plantation life and surviving all of those things, because we're way more than our bodies. We have to be 100% spiritual to remove that place. And if we did that on whatever level, then whatever we're dealing with in this life experience is light work. It's, you have done it, the race is already won. All you got to do is run it. It's been hundreds and thousands of years and all these different experiences. And, a blazing fire, it makes flame and brightness from everything thrown into it. So maybe that is the journey. It has to be everything thrown into it to show that you're unstoppable, to show that, no, you're really connected and one with this higher power that's omnipotent and omniscient and omnipresent. And if we really believe that as a people, when there is another group of people that have been doing the exact opposite, and we keep coming back, that welcome back means welcome back, king. Welcome back, queen. Welcome back, someone who they tried to send away, sent far from it. You came back. You came back to life again and again and again and again. And if we really embrace that, then we would truly be unstoppable.
I mean, Dr. Joy DeGruy talks about how epigenetics works in her book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. And she says that part of the reason many times we have stops, right, is from epigenetic trauma that's trapped in our DNA. Like, I won't do that. And I'll tell you, having led this tour as many times as I have, there have been travelers who are like, I can't go in that, that cell, the one cell that we go into, and they close the door, and they show you what the condemned captives went through, those who wouldn't, obey. And, they might walk in and like they have a panic attack. I can't go in there. And it's like, I honor that completely. There's no forcing anyone to do anything, because I do get that you may have been there. You have DNA programming that experienced it already, and there's no need to experience it again. And just walking through the door and peering into that room is enough to remind you of, the horrors that your ancestor went through. And so I fully understand that. I also believe it's one of the reasons why it's so important that we return. Not just to honor the ancestors, but to fully better understand who it is that we are as human beings who have the opportunity and privilege to be alive right now. And then what is it that I should be doing? When I tell you this sex trafficking epidemic is something that's really been in my spirit. Documented $34 billion industry, right? Documented. Like, this is what they know in terms of the money that's moving. And to really help us understand, because to the point that Marcella's made, it's very easy for us to get caught up in our lives the way they operate today. And when you go back and you realize what our ancestors went through, and then realize that I think about the sister who just was taken, was that Friday evening in Alabama. Is it Alabama or is where that happened? Who was just taken in Alabama, like right underneath our noses, like just taken. And I think about her, and I think about the other sisters and brothers who are mostly children, who are going through this. A $32 billion, at least documented $32 billion. God only knows how much undocumented money is moving through that industry, the $40 billion, $50 billion. And then, like, to really put it in perspective, right? I mean, we flew Delta to Accra and back. The airline industry in totality is a $20 to $22 billion industry. So sex trafficking trumps that in terms of the amount of money. And again, we have to understand part of the reason these ills of slavery and captivity on the continent took place was because of money and greed. And we still live in an environment where money and greed are creating the same type of ills for human beings on the planet. And I'm as you shared that, I'm just very aware of even the current circumstance, that there are young people, there are children, there are women, there are men who are suffering and being taken advantage of through that industry. And it's, again, it's very easy to get, insulated and also believe that it can't hit us. As many of our ancestors may have thought, heard about these rumors about the slave trade and captives and kidnappings and, we're all right here. We're in the interior, right? My ancestor was, 1,000 miles off the shores. And then for it to still hit home. And I think this is just another opportunity for us to wake up and, these things matter. Yes. They really do. And the trip is set up very purposely and front-loaded with the heavier portions of the trip. Because in many ways, we're opening a wound. Like, we get that. It's an epigenetic wound. We're opening a wound so we can properly heal it and really identify and get closer to that which is our purpose as a being. And then we go into the healing aspects, where we went to the school, Cape Coast School for the Deaf and Blind. After we go to the school, we also did Cocoon at some point, Cocoon National Park. But after we go to the school, we went to the Takrady Bisa Museum, the Pan-African Museum, where we learned more about our history and those who really supported Pan-Africanism and the forward motion of anyone, all of us in the African diaspora. We went back to Accra, and we had the opportunity to experience Accra, to experience Aburi, to shop, to really kind of come together and even go out and party with our Ghanaian brothers and sisters. And so the second portion of the trip is where we kind of take on the healing from, opening that wound. And I just want to invite you all to share your perspective on any of that, as we close. We only got about 12 minutes left in the show. But, what was that part of the journey like for you? And what would you say to someone who is, maybe on the fence about making this journey for themselves?
I'll start. I shared earlier, the first time we went to Cocoon Park, and my first trip to Ghana was a healing journey for me. I knew I had to go across the 7 bridges. I wasn't going to be the first. I wanted to make sure I followed, through. It was my first time there. But I knew I had to do this. And I just pictured my mom praying in one ear, my late husband singing in the other, and my 2 children on the other side. And I had to get there and be there for my children. I couldn't look to the left, couldn't look to the right, I couldn't look back. I had to stay focused. This year when I went with my daughter, she wanted to go ahead of me, so I let her go ahead of me. But here's the great thing about this trip, and the reason I said this trip, my first was a healing journey. This one was showing, Deb, it's going to be okay. Because as I went across each bridge, I wasn't afraid at all. I went across each bridge, and then I stopped for a moment. And I told you the first time I didn't look back, I didn't look to the side, but I stopped for a moment, and I thought about what Yatasha said, bringing the past into the future. I stopped. And I said, Deb, you can look back. You can look back and think about the memories of your mom and of my husband. It's okay. But just continue to stay focused and continue to move forward. So that was a great healing journey. And there was another Deborah on the trip. She was behind me. And she said, Deborah, I'm just going to follow you. When we got to the first crossing, she's like, oh, that's so tired. I'm so glad we're finished. And I said, well, okay, let's go. We got another one. Then we did another one. She was like, wait a minute. How many bridges are there? I said, oh, we'll be okay. We'll just continue. By the time we got to the 7th bridge, she's like, I had no idea there were 7 bridges. But, she stayed focused and we followed through. Another thing that stuck out with me for this trip, when we were, I think when Marcellus and I went back to one of the castles, we were at the restaurant there, and the chiefs had their ceremony. But what was so great, I saw young black men enjoying being young black men as they were preparing for their festival, their activities that evening. And I just took pictures and video because they were comfortable. They were at home. They were with their village, and they could be men. Their guards are down and everything else. And the last point, you mentioned you all went out clubbing. My daughter came in, and she said, Mom, it felt like we were celebrities in Hollywood. We got the red carpet treatment because the men on the trip allowed us to go where we wanted, but they were still protective. Hey, I'll get that for you. Don't worry. Go enjoy the dance floor. So she felt guarded and protected. And I think it's so important that our men, as you all mentioned earlier, they have to take a stand and protect our young people. And last but not least, I was in the resort. I was just applauding, for whomever birthday it was. I'm like, someone's birthday is the day before mine. And I always told my family, nobody could sing happy birthday like the people of Ghana. But when they came to my table singing to me, I was just too excited. So this was a great progress. This was a trip, a journey, as I'm continuing to making progress. And I definitely plan on being back in Ghana because there was something I went to Ghana with the first time with a project in mind, and I'm going to continue to build on that project.
Deborah, before you complete totally, you also donated 2 laptops to the school, the Cape Coast School for the Deaf and Blind. I wanted to acknowledge that. I'm not surprised that you didn't. That's just who you are. You give and forget, right?
And that was part of my goal. When I got there last year, I saw an article that said they were in need of technology, and I said that was something I wanted to do. So there are 2 more for that school, and there are other things that I want to do. And I just want to give a shout out to my friend Wheeler Coleman of Executive Consultants, who blessed me with those computers at a very reasonable price, got me the best price, so that I can make my vision come to reality. And I'm so glad.
Absolutely. Can you really quickly share how, you have a nonprofit, and if there's any, and you support young people with mathematics and STEM?
Yes.
And so anybody who wants to donate or maybe come to the gala, can you just share the website and where they can find you?
Yes. My non-for-profit is Math, M-A-T-H, with W-I-T-H, ease. There's 3 E's, to educate, enlighten, empower, Inc.com. So you can go to Math with Ease, and you can feel free to donate. And we work with young people who are going to college, majoring in STEM, and we're also branching out to organizations that are also helping. Our gala is Saturday, August 5th. Please feel free to donate. If tickets are still available, if seating is still available, feel free to purchase a ticket. But that's mathwithease.com. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. All right. Few minutes left. Any thoughts on like how the trip closed out and the healing portion of the trip that you would like to share?
Well, I think one of the Accra is a very fun city.
It is,
right?
Absolutely.
And going into Cape Coast, once you get past the slave dungeons, and I don't know if you can get past that, but there is life. There's resort. There is the ocean. Once you get past the post-traumatic stress disorder. No, but seriously, I mean, and there's there's festivals. There's opportunities, a million opportunities to dance and not go to any club, right? Which was, of course, fun for me as a dancer, but. I think that
I wish we had video so they could see how you get down. Like when I tell you all that Tasha is an amazing dancer, like it's an amazing dancer. Like she is really, man, it was awesome seeing you with the Ghanaians who are amazing dancers. Like do your thing. It was awesome.
Thanks. I have to thank Mayfair Academy for my foundation in dance. But I think I think a lot of African Americans will be happy to see how much African American representation there is in some of these Pan-African museums.
Yes.
Because the museum that we went to, we saw statues of course, Martin Luther King or Rosa Parks. Also George Floyd. There was a bust of George Floyd.
There was.
That was as prominent as the bust of Kwame Nkrumah, and I think that's important for people to see. But the most fun part is, I think, getting to learn the culture of Ghana. Meaning, we got to learn some words in Twi.
Yes.
You get to learn, a little bit about the Ghanaian culture itself. In addition to the return and the Pan-African mission, there is another black culture that's there.
Yes.
There's several ethnic groups. Each one has their own culture. You get to gain insights, and if anyone decides that they want to stay there for longer periods of time, learning and knowing that culture is really essential. Because I think sometimes as African Americans or just black people in the diaspora, we could get a little cocooned.
Yep.
Thinking all cultures are exactly like ours. And there's a lot of overlap, but it's a different culture, and if you go there, you do need to learn it and become a part of it, and be open and receptive to how that kind of transforms you.
Absolutely. Marcellus, Yvonne?
Well, I just, as Tasha said, it took a while to get past the dungeon. When they were talking about the women, and my son showed the strength of men having to look at their women and things happening to them, There were rapings. Yeah. People asked me about it. I said, well, they raped women on a regular basis.
Yep.
Just you chose you weren't a person. You were a tool to satisfy a need.
Right.
And then you were back. But very often you weren't back. You were pregnant.
That's right, yeah.
And he talked about how they took those lighter babies, raised them, separated them, and often put them spies with the others, or made them,
That's right.
whatever.
Or made them priests.
Or made them priests.
Yeah. Sent them to seminary, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the point is division of our people at a very early stage.
Oh, yeah.
And making us feel differently about one another. To me, that's just so organized and structured and, made that way that we have to say, oh, no. Oh, no, not us.
Mm-hmm.
To be strong and get away from that colorization
Absolutely.
thing brought about by rape of our ancestors, But going to the river helped me a lot.
Good.
Put my feet in the river. He said, call out your ancestors' names. And I was like, okay, I got to know more than my grandma. Let me stand here and think. And honestly, when I returned home, first thing I did was say, okay, grandma's mama is who?
Yeah.
Who's granddaddy? So, you got all these parentage. And so just that experience that and stand there with my best friends, my family, call on my children that weren't there. I have a daughter that wasn't able to come because she was expecting or had her baby. And calling her name out, and my niece and nephew, bringing them an experience of oneness and prayer just was the healing for me.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Marcellus, you got a 60-second drop before we close?
Yeah, that experience was all about oneness, connection, and transformation. And it's arguable that there's nothing changes you forever anywhere on the earth like Africa. And Ghana being an incredible destination for that. So with the experience that stood out was, with Deborah donating, computers and us being able to be a part of the Cape Coast School for the Deaf and the Blind, you saw an extra spiritual power within those kids. They're geniuses. They were doing dancing, not being able to hear, but dancing better than most people on this planet. So they just showed a power. And I think at the end of the day, it's transferring that and becoming, my friend Silas says, we should live our lives in a way where you can become an ancestor your descendants can pull strength from.
Mm-hmm.
And that's to give to those children in those ways that, I think that experience showed, and that we can take this experience and do as well. And even shout out to Dominique, who was on the trip, and her organization for Dreamers. There were several young people that were able to see that, and that transformed their lives. And I think it's pouring into them and knowing that we're in some way those ancestors in real life moments to pass forward and create for those generations coming up behind us.
Hey, my inspired peoples. LinalHarris here, certified ontological coach and trainer. I'm so excited that you're watching the channel. By the way, did you know you can catch the show live at 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. every Sunday morning? You can. All you have to do is go to my Facebook stream, Coach LinalHarris, catch the stream live, or you can listen to the radio show via iHeart at WVON 1690 AM. But since you're here, if you love the content, I ask that you share it, like this particular video, and subscribe to the channel. I hope you're having a great day.